Thank you, sweetie.
Hi, everyone. How are you all? Good to see you all. Hey, Chaya. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay. Hi, Joan, Helen. Okay. I am going to give one more minute for people to jump on. It's good to see you all. I want to remind people also who are watching the recording, because I know a few people said they're going to watch the recording, and all of you that are also on the Zoom. If you are going to sign up for the course, please be sure to do so this week. And then once I have the finalized list of everyone who signed up, I will add you to the WhatsApp. And then we'll be able to communicate better, because through the WhatsApp, I'll be able to send you the various things that we're talking about, and links that we've discussed, and other things like that. I haven't sent anything this week because I'm kind of waiting till we have the finalized group. I'm going to take out the existing group, the people that are not in it anymore, and I'm going to add to the existing group the people that are, and then we'll have the finalized WhatsApp group, and it will be easier for all of us. And then I'll send everything I promised last week as well. Okay, so it's wonderful to see all of you. If you remember, I said to you that in some ways, I know that my time likes to showcase the classes for the first 2 weeks, which are up on YouTube, and accessible to lots of people. In truth, it's not the best showcase of our class because, as those of you that know have been on the last few years, the class is really very interactive. It's what I call in very much in the Saxion guise like a dialogical class, right? Which means that we're basically essentially going to engage in a lot of dialogue. I am definitely going to be directing us. I'm going to be showing you how each book that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be unpacking the underlying philosophical principles. We're going to be understanding it from the perspective of Rabbi Sax's much wider theology. And obviously, all of these things are going to come out in our discussions and certainly in the presentations that I'm going to be doing. But it is for those of you that are, trying to find out a bit more about the course. It is going to be what's great about doing it on Zoom with a small group is that it allows for conversation, for dialogue, for us to work also in sometimes once in a while. I mean, I send you into what are called in the Zoom language breakout rooms, and those breakout rooms also allow you to meet the other people in the group and to have small discussions within the rooms themselves, and then we come back together and we discuss what each of the rooms was talking about. Another thing that's important for those of you on it now and for those that are going to be watching it on Zoom is that there is like an expectation. Again, this is not a university course. You're not getting any credits. I'm not going to go no if you don't do it. But the more you read, the more you will gain. Meaning the point of our Zoom is there's no way we're going to be able to read all of the entire book over Zoom. Like it's not, and that's not the aim. The aim is that you are going to come to the classes already prepared, having read the chapters that I'm going to set out for you. And even if you read, meaning the more you read, the more you'll gain. But even if you even read a little bit of everything that I said, what you're going to be able to do is to come with the knowledge that you have of reading the chapters and then bringing that or bringing maybe sometimes things that you don't understand. And I will be able hopefully to guide you and show you what actually Rabbi Sachs was saying and what message he's trying to bring across. Now, there's another two aims to the class. One is also Rabbi Sachs I actually literally just came back from doing an interview for his fifth Yortzeit. They're doing like a big video which they're showing at all the various events, of like the question of how we take Rabbi Sachs's legacy into the future. So they asked me to record for that. And one of the questions the interviewer asked me just now was, why do you think Rabbi Sachs has been so popular? All of a sudden, like certainly in Israel, certainly amongst the Israeli population, Hebrew-speaking language, why has he become such a popular voice? Like, meaning he was popular before, but even in his death, he's become even more popular. And I think one of the things about Rabbi Sachs's writing, and this is what we're really going to see, and we're actually going to be grappling with this in future tense, is that he's both a timely and timeless thinker, meaning there's elements of his work that are very, very timeless, okay, which again reflects the wider outlook of Judaism, which is always navigating the space, this intersection of, is Judaism a religion that's timeless, meaning are there things in Judaism we cannot change, we're never going to change, certainly always remain as they are? Or is Judaism a timely religion, meaning do we bring our past, our tradition, our legacy into the current moment? And the truth is that it's both. In the same way that I also believe there's something about Rabbi Sachs's thinking that sits at the intersection between timely and timeless. And certainly I see one of my roles as Rabbi Sachs's student, and certainly someone that is helping, or I like to think, or I'd like to believe, is helping to promulgate his legacy, is that I really am asking myself all the time when I'm reading his thinking, and here again we're going to be grappling really with his philosophical legacy more than his parshanut legacy, more than his kind of Torah interpretation legacy. I mean, even though there's a lot of overlap, I ask myself all the time when I'm reading his books, I'm like, did Rabbi Sachs think that this idea that he's bringing, right, is an idea in Judaism that is applicable to every moment and every time in Jewish history? And this is going to be the big question we're going to be asking when we look at Future Tense. Future Tense is a book, and I said this to you from the start already last week. It's a book that is going to push the boundaries. It's going to push us to think beyond what Rabbi Sachs is saying, because there's elements of the book in a post-710 world that are going to feel uncomfortable. And there's elements in the book, especially his chapters on anti-Semitism, that are going to be so prescient and so relevant that we're going to say, oh my gosh, he couldn't have written this 10, 15 years ago whenever he did. It must have been written now. But we're always everybody's going to be questioning this assumption of Rabbi Sacks that his writing can work for every single moment. Truthfully, no writer's writing will work for every single moment. And our job as his students, as people who are reading them in the current moment in Jewish, the current moment that we're in, is what is it about Rabbi Sacks' aspirational vision that we can adopt at this moment and appropriate to the moment that we're in. Okay, so that's really the job, that's the aim of the course, it's the aim of our discussions. And I would like to give you the tools to do that by helping you to see the layers that exist in Rabbi Sacks's thought. Okay, and that's really ultimately what we're going to be doing. We're going to jump back to what we were doing last time, which is essentially an introduction to Rabbi Sacks. As I said already, this is going to be more about me speaking rather than a discussion about the book. But I do want to say that those of you that have decided you're going to sign up for the class, I really, really recommend. I recommend buying the book already. I recommend buying Future Tense and beginning to read it, because by next week we're going to be beginning it. Hold on, I've just got a message. This is so weird. People are telling me that the class hasn't that they're waiting for the Zoom class. Does anyone else know that? So
No.
bizarre.
Maybe they joined something in your group and not what was on the
Yes,
Matan links.
yeah,
Hold on, let
there
me
is
just
there is
share
a
this.
problem with Matan website.
'Cause
The
I opened the Matan chart
yeah,
and that's how I came on. But
right,
maybe
but you came through,
there was
you
something in
probably
the
came
in
through
the
I just
group.
suggest that you send the link to
I'm
whomever's
gonna send.
yeah.
I'm gonna send it now. If you just give me 1 second, I'm gonna send it, and I'm gonna
It's a
send
good
it
idea.
also on the existing group that we have. Hold on, I've just got it. My WhatsApp is. Oh, why am I echoing as well?
Because
Can
I'm
you
not
hear
on mute. I need
Because you have both your phone open and your computer open.
No, but my phone isn't connected to the Zoom, so that, okay, now it's stopped. It's really weird. Okay, so while my WhatsApp's loading, I'm gonna carry on speaking. It's really bizarre. I don't know why this has happened, and it's even more annoying because there's no one in the office now that I can even speak to about it. It's kind of all falls on me. Okay, 1 second. Tov, okay, let's I'm gonna share screen and I'm gonna talk to you and try and send this at the same time.
Just send it.
It happened to
Yeah,
me
no, I
too.
can't at the
If you
moment because
go
I'm waiting.
through, you can't hear me. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can
Oh,
hear
you can?
you.
Okay. If you
Yeah.
if you go to your personal area and you've already signed up for the class, you have a Zoom link from there. That link
Yes.
doesn't work. You still have to go through the 2-week free Zoom link in order to get on.
Oh, okay, well that's really silly that they did that. Okay.
Yeah, I
Maybe
did.
that's where people have
So
gone
they can be
wrong.
waiting forever because they're waiting for next week.
Oh, boy.
So they
Okay, so
need to
just
be
give
told to get on to the to get on
yeah.
through the free the 2-week free link.
So why didn't they specify that in the email?
They didn't realize. And
Okay,
this
hold on.
way it prevents people from being able to get the link for next week if they haven't registered.
Oh, that's
No,
interesting.
I
I
realize
also
that, but
just
I'm
got
saying,
in now through the free link. Right.
okay, just give me a sec. I've managed to get onto my WhatsApp.
Okay.
Okay, 1 minute. Sec. And I'm going to put it on the group in case there's anyone on the group that hasn't got it. Okay, yalla. WhatsApp is very, very slow for some reason, but I imagine it will go through at some point. Okay. Tov, 1 sec. This is really annoying. All right. Okay, I am going to. Let me just.
Nobody in the office now?
He said, I believe I do, but it doesn't appear in the right place. Okay. Hold on, just give me 1 sec. Because this is just, no, there's no one in the office now, which is always a problem with our class, to be honest. And there's no one really to contact either, which is frustrating. Hold on a minute. Just put it on the Tuesday class, Tuesday. Okay, done. Yalla. Okay, right, back to all of you. So apologies, those of you that couldn't get in there. I think what Matan did is they sent you the link already for next week, not for this week, which was the free link that you had this week. So those of you coming in now, I apologize that it was all a bit of a mix-up from the office in Matan. Hi, Josh, and Michelle, yay, hi. Okay, so welcome everyone. So I'm going to remind you that last time we were doing an introduction. Those of you that just came on now because the link wasn't working, just to review what I was saying is that the last week and this week is not necessarily representative of the genre of the class, which is going to be more discursive and certainly more more engaging in dialogue. It's really kind of more of at the moment I'm presenting a background to Rabbi Sachs. Again, those of you that have been with me over the last few years, a lot of this will be familiar, but it's still really important for us to understand where he's come from, what he is. The other thing I spoke about is that this notion of Rabbi Sachs's thinking being both timely and timeless, which I think is very much why he is speaking to this moment. Whenever people are hearing him at this moment, during the war, post-war, there's a lot of ideas that Rabbi Sachs brings to the fore that speak and that characterize our experience. And I think that this is something that this is perhaps one of the reasons that he is really kind of touching on a very real and raw moment in our history. Rabbi Sachs, as I said already, is a thinker that is both aspirational, meaning he's a visionary. He knows so much. He's so wide-read. He touches on every kind of genre of writing, that there's something about that wideness of vision that allows him to be a certain form of visionary. And we're going to see in a minute how Professor Joshua Berman describes him almost in prophetic terms, right? There's something prophetic about his thinking. But at the same time, he's a visionary, but he's also a pragmatist. He's a pragmatist in the sense that he recognizes that sometimes in order for a vision to come to fruition, one also has to be very aware and fundamentally oriented to what's happening on the ground. Because what's happening on the ground cannot preclude our vision. Meaning if we're just looking at the vision, if we're just the visionary, we're going to forget, we're not going to be able to take our vision and ground it. But if we're only on the ground in the messy and complex reality, and we only are seeing what's happening here and now and not thinking about the vision, then we're not going to be able to have what we've been calling this idea of hope, of tikva, which allows us to both see the vision and both work on the ground. So I think there's something about Rabbi Sachs that is very much speaking to us in this moment. The other thing I will say is very early on in the war, Miriam Peretz, who we all know here in Israel, she's like kind of the mother figure of the Israeli nation. She lost 2 of her sons before the war, a long time ago, and then her husband, and she became this kind of persona that really encapsulated so much of the Jewish spirit. And she said very soon after the war that the name of this war, even while we were in it, should be called Meshiv HaRuach, okay, which is essentially the idea of what we say on Shmini Atzeret, which is Morit Hatal v'Meshiv HaRuach, Meshiv HaRuach v'Morit Hatal. And she said, because what happened is on October the 8th, we saw this spirit of Judaism, which perhaps we'd lost or forgotten and become apathetic towards, kind of return. But I would say that it's unbelievable because even her words today are so prophetic. There is something about what has happened, I would say, over the last 2 years, especially over the last few months, when we've seen the return of the hostages and we've seen the way in which they're speaking and what they're bringing to the table and what they're bringing out into the public discourse is what I would call Meshiv Haruach. It's really the renaissance of the spirit. There's something about the spirit of Judaism that is being awoken, that is waking up in our people. And this spirit is very much the point to which Rabbi Sachs speaks. And that's why I think the language that he speaks, the way he does it, the way in which he understands that there is a core essence that sits at the heart of the Jewish people. And in order to tap into that essence, doesn't necessarily require absolute obedience to this certain religious model that perhaps all of, that, I don't know, over the centuries, maybe we felt had to, be intact. And at the same time, though, it veers away from this very humanistic, liberal humanistic perspective. There's something about the spirit of Judaism that sits at the intersection between these two things. And that's what Rabbi Sachs represents. And that's why I think his voice is really a voice that is being adopted or really characterizing this moment in Jewish history. Okay, so I'm going to share now back to the PowerPoint that we were doing last time, where we left off, and I kind of framed the PowerPoint and the introduction to Rabbi Sachs through this idea of tikva, of hope. And what I wanted to show you was how the notion of hope in Judaism, and again, very, very famously, one of the most famous quotes by Rabbi Sachs is the difference between optimism and hope is that optimism is the idea that everything's going to be okay, and hope is the idea that together we will make everything okay. So this is kind of very, very well known kind of soundbite of Rabbi Sachs. And what I wanted to show you was that it's not just a soundbite, and it doesn't just sound nice, and it's not just a nice way of understanding the idea of hope, but it actually sits at the heart of Rabbi Sachs, the fundamental principles that undergird Rabbi Sachs's thinking. And those principles are essentially the idea that together we can make it okay. Rabbi Sachs was a communitarian philosopher, and we're going to touch on all of these ideas much more in depth as we go on. But what that means is that he didn't believe in the self as being defined purely by the self. Okay, he says that the self is always defined by something outside of the self. Okay, now what does he mean by that? He means that we are born into the world with certain ties, certain invisible strings that we're aligned with our family, our religion, our history, our tradition, whatever it happens to be, our nation. Okay, and those strings pull on us, those strings define us, those strings define our outlook, and we can't escape them. But at the same time, we're also born free. And freedom is given to us not as a right, but as a responsibility. Okay, that's what Rabbi Sachs says. Freedom is not about freedom from, it's about freedom to. Freedom to how am I going to use my freedom in order to take responsibility for the world around me? And the way we do that, and again, this is very much linked to his idea of hope, the way we do that is to understand that we need to act, and we need to act together with other people in covenant. And this, hold on. Okay, and this allows us, okay, to not just remain passive, okay, objects of fate, but to become active subjects of our destiny. And again, this links in with a lot of influences on Rabbi Sachs, such as, for example, Viktor Frankl and others. But I want to draw us now to where we left off last time, and that is the 3 pillars of Rabbi Sachs's thought. So I'm going to begin with the idea of freedom, and I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to ask people here, certainly people that have been with me until now, why is it that freedom, Rabbi Sachs, one of the major components of any of his thoughts, okay, is the idea that human beings are free. Where does that come from? Does anyone want to share with us where they think Rabbi Sachs takes that idea from? You can just open your microphones and shout out, because I am sharing screens, so I can't see all of you. I'm sorry, I'm like, you know what, let me just quickly close my, hold on, you're going to see my screen a minute. 1 second. Okay, sorry. Okay, who wants to tell me why freedom is so important for Rabbi Sachs? Anyone? Okay, so let's begin with his history. What influenced Rabbi Sachs philosophically? Anyone? What
Rabbi Soloveitchik.
Rav Soloveitchik for sure, but I want to go back even further. I'm not talking about Jewish influences necessarily. We're going to talk about Rav Soloveitchik's influence later on.
The first place I would look at is the community in which he was raised, where he went to school. What was the whole philosophy there surrounding him? And
Or his
certainly
For
family.
sure.
we're
For
a group
sure,
in the
his
United
family.
States, the individual and the individual having freedom was very strong. I believe he grew up in Great Britain. So I would be looking at those. What are the general influences in society around him?
100%. Not even a question. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his upbringing in a minute, and we're going to try and understand the biographical information that we have, how it forms his outlook in the world. But I want to go back specifically to do with the notion of freedom. Where was Rabbi Sacks educated? Where did he go to university? Anyone
Oxford,
know?
Oxford,
did he go
no?
to Oxford?
Cambridge.
Cambridge in the 1960s. What did he do? He learned in the philosophy department. Whose thinking was prominent in the philosophy department in those days? Enlightenment philosophers. Okay, so we're talking people here like Kant, like Descartes, like, again, all of these names, if you're familiar or not familiar with them, you'll become more familiar with them as time goes on. Kant, Descartes, Spinoza, Heidegger, and many others. And their philosophy essentially is born in the French Revolution. What was the kind of the main principles of the French Revolution?
Liberty.
Liberty, equality,
Freedom.
fraternity. Okay,
Right.
freedom. What were they trying to break out from?
Monarchy.
Monarchy and religion. Okay,
And religion.
monarchy and the church, really the church fathers, the domination, the coercion of the church over the life of the individual. And so one of the major principles that underpins the French Revolution, and then obviously following that, the Enlightenment period, specifically the philosophical elements in the Enlightenment period, is the idea that we are free and that the law, the nomos, doesn't necessarily need to come from outside of the self, from an external authority, be that God or the church. Okay, it needs to come from within the self, because we are all, and here's the key word, we are all autonomous individuals. Okay, we have autonomy. We need to have autonomy over our lives to live a healthy, fruitful, forward-looking life. And so for Rabbi Sacks, this was many of the voices that he was, totally ensconced in during his time in Cambridge. He was learning Enlightenment philosophy. And all of a sudden, we're gonna see in a minute, when we look at a few biographical details of his life, we're gonna see that Rabbi Sacks very, very much identified with this idea of liberal individualism, with the idea of autonomy of the individual. It was very much in his thinking. But what Rabbi Sacks realizes ultimately, okay, is that it's not born with the French Revolution. Okay, the idea of the freedom of the individual begins many, many centuries before. Where does it begin? It begins with the Bible. Okay, it begins with the Bible, and the Bible is the place where we begin to see that being created in the image of God endows us with certain unequivocal rights. And one of them is freedom. Okay, and I want to read with you what he says. I brought for you specifically something from his book, Radical Then, Radical Now. As we're reading it, I want you to think carefully, right? I want you to read it. Again, this is one of the things that I really hope that we're going to be able to learn together, is not just to read and accept things, but to read things with a critical eye, to try and think, okay, what is Rabbi Sacks saying here? Is he right? Where's he coming from? What's underlying the principles of his writing? Okay, and so I want us to read this. He says like this: for the Hebrew Bible, there's a difference between freedom and a free society. Okay, so for the Hebrew Bible, again, this is the brilliance of Rabbi Sacks' ability to see beyond the immediacy of the text, to see beyond the immediacy of the verse, but to actually place it within much wider framing and perspective of what is the Torah trying to tell us vis-a-vis our lived lives, right? Individuals in a society. What does that mean? Okay, Hebrew contains contains many words for freedom, but two have particular significance: chofesh and cherut. Chofesh means individual freedom. Okay, what Isaiah Berlin calls negative liberty. Okay, Isaiah Berlin, who was a very famous philosopher, writing in the 19th, 20th century in Britain, someone that Rabbi Sachs really respected. He spoke actually at his funeral, at his levaya. He wasn't a religious Jew. In fact, he called himself an atheist. But Rabbi Sachs very often, in many anecdotal paragraphs in his writings, he speaks about conversations he has with Isaiah Berlin. And one time he says to Isaiah Berlin, Isaiah Berlin says, I don't know how you believe. And Rabbi Sachs says, I don't know how you don't believe. And Isaiah Berlin says to him, well, maybe I can't, maybe I'm tone deaf. Meaning to be religious is to hear the music that sits underneath the reality that we live. Okay, and that's how Rabbi Sachs very often describes this idea. And again, it goes back to this idea of the spirit. The spirit is something that sits underneath the given dimensions of our existence. Okay, and so what Isaiah Berlin says here is that there are two forms of freedom. Isaiah Berlin is writing, by the way, just to give you some context, he's writing during the time of communism, and he is very, very afraid. Okay, he's very afraid of individual liberty being taken away by the state. So Isaiah Berlin emphasizes the idea of negative liberty. Negative liberty is freedom from. In order for me to have my most basic rights, I need freedom from. I need to be free from coercion. I need to be free from someone literally tying me up, but metaphorically binding me to an ideology that I don't necessarily believe in. Okay, I need freedom from. But Rabbi Sachs essentially is saying here that for Isaiah Berlin, we need to take one step further. We also don't just need freedom from. That's the first level. We then need to know how to channel our negative freedom into a positive energy, into what Isaiah Berlin calls freedom to. Freedom to is, what do I now do with my freedom in order to have purpose and meaning in my life? In order for me to know my place vis-a-vis society, vis-a-vis community, vis-a-vis religion, nation, whatever you want to call it. And this is what he says. He says, chofesh means individual freedom, negative liberty. It is what a slave acquires when he or she goes free. They are no longer subject to someone else's order. They can do what they like. Freedom in this sense can never be an adequate basis for a free society for an obvious reason. Sooner or later, my freedom will conflict with yours. If I am free to steal, you are not free to own. If I am free to attack, you are not free to walk without fear. Freedom for the pike means death to the minnows. A society based on chofesh, what today is called a libertarian society, will be one in which the strong will prevail over the weak, the many over the few, the powerful over the powerless. In the Exodus, the Israelites acquired their chofesh. They were no longer slaves, but they were not yet a free society, meaning they had chofesh, but they didn't have cherut. At Sinai, they acquired cherut, their constitution of liberty as a nation. Okay, so now I'm going to stop share for a minute so I can see you all. I want to talk for a second about what this idea of freedom looks like for Rabbi Sachs. So this idea of freedom for Rabbi Sachs is the notion that we are free, and freedom is not enough. Okay, freedom is not enough, which is exactly why I opposed his thinking as a triangle. Because if we just are free, what will ultimately happen is, if we only focus on chofesh and not cherut, on negative liberty and not positive liberty, we become a society that is focused on rights rather than responsibilities, and is focused on the individual rather than being focused on what lies beyond the individual. And that being the case, there is a very, very narrow prism of freedom, of what freedom means in practice. Okay, and what we're seeing today with radical individualism, radical liberalism, woke, okay, is where there has been an overemphasis on negative liberty rather than positive liberty. Okay, I'll give you an example. My kids very often throughout, a few of them have left school now, but when they were in school, so some still are, they used to say to me, Emma, there is no point in me going to school. It's just a waste of time. I'd rather just go to the beach or find a job or whatever it happens to be. And I said to him, c'est la vie, you're right. Sometimes school is a waste of time. But Begadol, in the big picture, you need to go to school. Because what you need to do is to put constraints on yourself now in order for you to be able to have freedom later. Now, all of us know this, okay? Anyone who has worked on a serious goal, okay, try to achieve a serious potential. You have to have certain constraints, okay? Playing an instrument, writing a doctorate, I can tell you, okay? Writing a book, achieving a business, okay? Building a business. You have to put certain constraints on ourselves in the short term in order to achieve long-term freedom. What is long-term freedom? Long-term freedom, and this we'll talk about how Rabbi Sachs perceives this, but essentially long-term freedom allows me to have a plethora of possibilities at my fingertips, okay? Long-term freedom allows me to have a life that is meaningful, a life that has purpose, a life that is more than just reacting to immediate gratification, okay? And so Rabbi Sachs understood this immediately. And what he began to realize is that the freedom that was adopted by the philosophers of the Enlightenment period had readily become a freedom without responsibility. Now, this isn't what the Enlightenment philosophers actually aimed for, and this wasn't what they believed, okay, and this wasn't the aim of their agenda, but it's what happened. And the reason it happened is because freedom was not aligned with anything else. And so for Rabbi Sachs, freedom has to have three parts. We have to be free. We're created free in the image of God. We're created as free human beings. If we don't have freedom, then we cannot possibly partnership with God in the world to make the world a better place, because we're not free to do it. Okay, we're coerced. So God says we have to have freedom, but freedom has to be aligned with two other elements, and that is responsibility and covenant. If you want my opinion, this is only my opinion. I believe that Rabbi Sachs's thought sits in, and we're going to refer back to this all the time, in this triangle where every single thing depends on the other, of covenant, responsibility, and freedom. And so I'm going to take us now from freedom to responsibility, because again, if we only take freedom to be freedom from, if we only talk about rights and we only talk about individualism, okay, it ultimately leads down the slippery slope where we get to a point where we can no longer function in the world as normal human beings, because all we have done is focus on the I. And this is going to also be the basis of his book, Morality, which I think we already read. We read last year, where he speaks about the I and the we. And he says that we have become such an I society, we've forgotten that there is a we. And the we is where morality is born, not in the I. Okay, and again, that is a polemic against many of the Enlightenment philosophers. Okay, we'll come back to that a bit later because it's a bit deeper philosophy. But I want us to look for a minute at responsibility. Rabbi Sachs's idea of responsibility. I just bought one quote. I could have bought numerous ones. Okay, he says, and this is from actually a very early essay called "From Renewal to Responsibility." He says physical strength needs numbers. The larger the nation, the more powerful it is. But when it comes to spiritual strength, you need not numbers, but a sense of responsibility. Okay, meaning what? Spiritual sense. And here I take you back to what we've been speaking about till now, which is this idea of tikva, of Jewish hope, and how Rabbi Sachs sees it. And Rabbi Sachs says that the idea of tikva is predicated on this idea of spirit, okay? This idea that there's something that sits underneath, and that in order for us to achieve the spirit or reach the spirit, we need to transcend the self, okay? You need a people, each of whom knows that he or she must contribute something to the human heritage, leaving the world better than it would have been had they not existed. The Jewish question is not what can the world give me? It is what can I give to the world? The Jewish story is a story of responsibility. Okay, now why is this so important? Because I want to just talk for a second about the word responsibility. Responsibility, the word responsibility comes from two words, which is what? Anyone?
Thought of it.
Responsibility.
Yeah, responsibility. And what Rabbi Sachs says somewhere else is responsibility is essentially the ability to respond. Now, what does that even mean? The ability to respond. And by the way, he adds into that the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for responsibility is achrayut. Buried in the Hebrew word for responsibility is the word acher, the other. Responsibility is essentially something that draws me out from my eye experience. And by the way, this is absolutely fascinating. If you listen, I was just listening now to a podcast with Chaviv Retek Gore, who interviewed Eli Sharabi. And by the way, those of you that are near Renana, we're doing an evening on November the 20th for Rabbi Sachs' 5th Yortzeit, slightly delayed. It's the week after the Yortzeit, where I'm going to be in conversation with Chaviv Retek Gore in Renana, in Matana Sharon in Renana. So if you can travel or you're near there, put it in your diary, Thursday, November the 20th in the evening. So Chaviv Retek Gore said to Eli, was speaking to Eli Sharabi, and one of the things that Eli Sharabi says, and by the way, not just him, but many of the hostages that returned, that what kept them sane throughout the time that they were in the Gazan tunnels was the fact that they had to respond to somebody outside of themselves, meaning Eli Sharabi said he realized that he was the father figure for many of these younger hostages, and he just couldn't break. And he felt responsible. He uses the word responsible again and again. He felt responsible to these other hostages who were looking to him to help them. Okay, if you listen to interviews with Bar Kupperstein, okay, and I don't know if I recount to you last week, I met Julie Kupperstein, Bar's mother, right at the beginning of the war, very, very early on, when there were still all the hostages that were still in Gaza, even the kids and whatever else, way before we knew who Bar was. And I met her at Hostage Square. I had gone there with a group, and another time, because it's not relevant to this particular conversation, I'll tell you about the experience I had with her then. But Bar Kupperstein, who also came out, he spoke about the fact that whenever they moved to a new place, he took upon himself to be responsible to make the conditions for all the other hostages as good as possible. So he would find an electricity point, he would connect the radio and find the radio things, he would create a hole for them to do, to excuse themselves, all of these things that made their existence slightly better. Meaning, what is responsibility? The ability to respond to circumstances that are beyond my control. Okay? If you look at Viktor Frankl, the idea of logotherapy, if you look at all of this notion, again, this takes us back to Rav Soloveitchik's very famous essay, Fate and Destiny. And this was a massive influence on Rabbi Sachs, where Rav Soloveitchik also speaks, it's basically his post-Holocaust Zionist theology, where he also speaks about this idea that we exist as human beings between fate and destiny. Fate, Viktor Frankl said the same thing in different words. Fate is what happens to me. It is the circumstances that are beyond my control. And all of us, every single one of us, okay, because we're human beings and we live in the messy existence of reality, every single one of us will be faced with circumstances that we don't always choose, whether that's an illness, whether that's financial issues, whether that's familial challenges with children, with parents, with family, whatever, spousal, but whatever it happens to be, every single person is going to have a situation in their lives, unless you don't really live life and you basically put walls up and live in your basement your whole life. Every single person is going to have challenges and things that happen to them that are beyond their control. But as Viktor Frankl said to us, as he studied the people in the concentration camps, and as Rav Soloveitchik talks about in the idea of fate and destiny in his essay, Fate and Destiny, that is what we call an existence of fate. An existence of fate is when I say, these things have happened to me, I am standing like an object, and I'm allowing all these things to happen to me, and I become a victim of my circumstances. Now we know, and this is what's fascinating to me, because all of these things intersect in the world that we're living in and in Rabbi Sachs's thinking. We know that when there is too great an emphasis on individualism, and there is too great an emphasis on freedom as negative freedom, it is so easy for us to slip in to a culture of victimhood. Okay, what we're seeing in progressive circles, in radical progressive circles today in the West, is the result of Enlightenment philosophy gone wrong. It is the result of overemphasis on the role of the freedom of the individual. And that has led to a culture of victimhood. Okay, now again, it's beyond the scope of this introductory class to really unpack every single one of these ideas. That's going to be what we're going to be doing as we move forward, especially with the book we're doing, Future Tense, because in that book, Rabbi Sachs talks about anti-Semitism and he talks about the idea of victimization, okay? So we're really going to unpack it, but I want to just give you a taster of a few of the themes that we already have. Ultimately, what we see is that the overemphasis of individuality and freedom has led to a victim culture, because I essentially turn around and I say, I am the victim of my circumstances and it's all happening to me and I'm locked inside my eye and I'm emphasizing all the time what's happening to me and how is it this happening to me, and what Viktor Frankl says and what Rav Soloveitchik says and what positive psychology says and what the hostages are saying as they came out from Gaza, and what many people who are grappling or are talking about the spirit of Judaism are saying in the lay circles today in Israel is, we have never been and we will never be the victims of our circumstances. That is not the Jewish way. Our way is to transform, as Rav Soloveitchik says, to transform fate into destiny. That is a existence that is passive, an existence in which I am worked upon and an object of my circumstances, to an existence that is active, to where I'm an agent of my destiny, in which I take those circumstances that are beyond my control, because there's many things that are, and I transform that into a orientation that is spirited and that allows me, even in the smallest arena, allows me to choose the way in which I frame my existence. That is responsibility for Rabbi Sachs. To do that, what do we need to do? We have to recognize that we have an ability to respond to the circumstances outside our control. We have an ability to respond to the acher, to the other, achrayut, to the other that is calling to me. Now that other that's calling me to respond to them, okay, that other can be God, that other can be my neighbor, that other can be pick your person, okay, whoever it is. But to know and to hear them calling, I have to open my eyes and open my ears, okay? That is what I'm calling the Meshiv Haruach moment that we're in I would say the Jewish people are in today. Because what you have seen, and here I'm talking about October the 8th, Jews in the diaspora, and I'm talking about many, many young people here in Israel, what you're seeing is a spiritual renaissance, nothing less. And that spiritual renaissance, in my mind, is the recognition that there is something that sits under the given of our reality. And what sits under the given of reality, and you can call it spirituality, you can call it God's footprints in the history of the Jewish people, whatever you want to call it, okay? But that allows us to respond to our circumstances, even though sometimes they are the most dire of circumstances, but to respond to them through the prism of spirit, of light, of positivity. Okay, when Eli Shrabi said, when they were 50 meters underground in the tunnels, hide in Gaza, and every single day they had a ritual of saying 5 good things that happened to them that day. Okay, we have a ritual every Friday night in our family that we have the good thing of the week. And sometimes one of my daughters in particular, right, and I don't, nothing good happened to me this week. And we said, that's exactly the point. Something good, of course, happened to you this week, and you're going to find out something good. When if Eli Shrabi and the hostages could find 5 good things a day that happened to them in where they were, then we can as well. But again, to do that, what do you need to do? You have to have a certain prism, you have to have a certain outlook, you have to be able to respond, ability to respond to those circumstances. And that's exactly what Viktor Frankl spoke about as well. So that's the second element. You cannot have freedom without responsibility. It's too dangerous. Okay, it's too dangerous on so many levels. And the third thing is covenant. And before I share the screen again, I'll just explain. Because I told you responsibility draws us out from the self, okay? Responsibility is the ability that I have to draw myself beyond my immediate needs, my immediate desires, my immediate gratification, okay? It draws me out to something that I need to respond to outside the self. Covenant is the way I do that. Covenant means that God, okay, again, covenant here works for Rabbi Sacks on many levels. Okay, it works at the level of the relationship between the divine and human, and it also works at the level of society. How do we create a society? According to Rabbi Sacks, it's got to be a covenantal society. And again, Future Tense is such a great book because it touches on all of these themes in different ways, but even more so because it touches it vis-a-vis society in Israel, which is really, really interesting. It's one of the only places that Rabbi Sacks writes about it. And what Rabbi Sacks says is that if we're going to create a state that is able to balance the rights of the individual with the responsibilities towards the community or towards the collective, we have to do so through the paradigm of covenant, not contract. Okay, and we'll talk about the difference between contract and covenant. So that society, when we're talking about God, Rabbi Sacks follows in the guise of what we call the covenantal theologians, who were specifically thinkers in America during the 1950s and 60s in America, beginning with Rav Soloveitchik, Eliezer Berkovitz, Yitz Greenberg, David Hartman, Eugene Borowitz. There were many different what we call covenantal thinkers, and Rabbi Sacks follows in their footsteps. And Rabbi Sacks says that our relationship to God in the Bible is based on covenant, meaning the Bible brought, I can't remember if I spoke about this last week, someone tell me if I did, but the Bible brings two revolutions to the world. Did I speak about this last week? No? Either of you don't remember, or Michelle, you watched it because you weren't on last week, right?
Just
Hi,
walk.
Tammy, I didn't even see you there. Nice to see you. Okay, so good. So I didn't speak about it. So let me tell you, there are two revolutions that happen in the Bible, with the Bible coming into the world. The first is the one that we all talk about and we all know about, and that is the revolution of monotheism, okay, which is essentially the revolution in thinking, theological revolution, that moves us from a polytheistic world. What's polytheism? Many gods. Okay, the idea that there's many gods and each god has a realm of influence. And polytheism essentially limits, and I would say even denigrates the role of humankind. Okay, the people who are in charge, the way in which the world works, when things happen, it's all through the gods. And each god has their realm of influence, and each god, if you want to influence the realm of if you want to influence the will of the god, you have to sacrifice something to the god in order to manipulate the god, in order for the world to work the way that it's in your favor. Okay, but basically humans can't do anything in the world. That's monotheism. Monotheism is this idea that there is one god, that it's not dualism, that there's not a god for evil and good, that there's not a god that reigns over the water and one over the land and one over the that there's one God and one God's in charge of everything. But there's a second revolution. If that's the theological revolution of the Bible, there is a second revolution of the Bible. And the second revolution of the Bible is what I like to call the anthropological revolution, which focuses not just on the realm of God and how we perceive of God, but focuses actually on the way in which God perceives humankind. Okay, or, and I would say even more radically, the way in which humankind perceive themselves. Like, what is my perception of my role in the world? What is my perception of humankind's role in the world? And what Judaism, what the Bible brings to the world, is the concept of covenant. And the concept of covenant is very simple. And I'm going to say it exactly how Rabbi Sacks says it. This is a Rabbi Sacks class. So I'm going to say it exactly how he says it. He says it like this. More than our belief in God, what is important to know is that God believes in us. I'm going to say it again because I think it's a tool for everything in our lives, be it parenting, be it spousal relationships, be it work, whatever it happens to be. Any encounter we have with another human being can be, I could say, it can be channeled, okay, through this understanding. More than our belief in God, what is important is that we believe that God believes in us. Okay. Now, Rabbi Sacks loved to quote Moda Ani. When you say Moda Ani, every morning we wake up. And Rabbi Sacks says, that's how we should read it, right? With great compassion, God, Rabba emunatecha, how great is your belief in us? Okay, when I spoke last year at the AJC in America, They wanted me to open up the rabbinic forum. And one of the things I spoke about was exactly this idea that Rabbi Sachs really, really, they always say every child needs an adult to believe in them. Okay. But the truth is that every single morning we wake up in the morning, we open up our eyes, and we make one of the most incredible, radical statements. Okay, that is not a theological revolution, but an anthropological revolution, when we essentially turn around and say, oh, do you know what? Even as an adult, there's someone that believes in me. God believes in me. And what that creates is a sense of partnership, because it's not just that I'm waiting for God to save me. It's not that just I'm relying on God for everything to work out. And this takes us back to the idea of tikva and the idea of optimism and hope. It's not just to say, I believe everything's going to be okay. It's to say that in partnering with God, we will make it okay. And that is the fundamental principle that I think revolutionizes humankind after the Bible. Okay? And therefore leads to Rabbi Sachs's concept of covenant. So I'm going to just show you again what he says here. He says, and again, I could bring a million different examples of where he uses covenant, but this one I specifically bought from his book, Morality, which is the last book that Rabbi Sachs published before his death. And there it's very much, channeled to a much wider audience than just the Jewish world. Okay, there he's really speaking about the idea of how basically we've gone down a slippery slope in Western society, and morality doesn't exist, and why that's happened. And he says like this, he says, in covenant, two or more individuals, each respecting the dignity and integrity of the other, come together in a bond of love and trust to share their interests, sometimes even to share their lives, by pledging their faithfulness, that's the key word, to one another, to do together what neither can achieve alone. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Unlike contracts which are entered into for the sake of advantage, covenants are moral commitments sustained by loyalty and fidelity, even when they call for sacrifice. They are about you and I coming together to form a we. The contract is a transaction. Covenant is a relationship. Contract is about interests. Covenant is about identity. That is why contracts benefit, but covenants transform. A covenant creates a moral community. Oh no, I can't see this. Second. So it binds people together in a bond of mutual responsibility and care. So I want to just go back for a second what he says here. He says that it's about me and you coming together to create something, to form a we, and to create something that we can't create on our own. And essentially, this is the message of the Bible. If you look very clearly at many narratives in the biblical text, you see that God reaches out to humankind and asks humankind to partner with him in solving the problems of the world. When God wants to take the people out of Egypt, he could have done it on his own. Essentially, he does. Okay, he has the plagues and he has splitting of the sea. Why does he ask Moshe to do what, to put his stick into the water? Like, really? That's what created the plague? No, because there is a fundamental message that he's giving over to the Jewish people. And this is the paradigm shift. The paradigm shift is that God is turning to mankind and asking mankind to partner with him in bringing about redemption to the world. It's not something that God is willing. He can do it alone. He's not willing to do it alone. It's almost like a pedagogical movement, right? It's the way we teach our kids. How do we teach our kids to be responsible? How do we teach our kids to withhold short-term gains for long-term gain? How do we teach our kids all the lessons we want to create a healthy individual? We have to do it through showing them showcasing to them what responsibility looks like. Okay, and that's what God does when he calls Moshe into partnership. That's what he does when he calls Abraham into partnership. That's what he does when he calls Noah into partnership by building the ark. That's what he does when he calls the prophets into partnership, when he calls Gideon into partnership. All of these are ways that God essentially turns around and says to us, I need you to help me to make the world better and other than it is. And here I want to show you. Oh, do you know what? I just realized I think I didn't do, let me just a second. I'm going to share screen again, this time with sound so that you can just hear this. One sec. Are there any, while I'm getting this done, are there anyone want to, any comments, any questions? Just open your mic.
Hi, Tanya.
Oh. How are you, Tammy? Good to see you.
So good to see you and to be here. Thank you.
So happy you're with us.
Same
Okay,
here.
well, we're going to get to know everyone next week. We're going to open next week when everyone's registered, and we're going to go around and everyone will introduce themselves properly.
Tanya?
Okay, so Yeah, sure.
Question. When you were talking about libertarianism, I was thinking of civil libertarianism as well, and how that is it's strong influence in our society, and I know in the West, but how would Rabbi Sachs deal with that? Civil libertarian.
What do you mean by civil libertarianism? You need to be more specific for me.
Government, police, speech. But
Okay, so
it's for the everybody. I mean, it's I guess
yeah,
for the
yeah. So
individual, but it's for a society.
again, it depends. Like again, we'd have to unpack this question. It's a much bigger question about the political kind of which political system Rabbi Sachs believes to be ideal. He has a brilliant, brilliant essay on why he believes democracy, not libertarianism, what he calls where he differentiates between communitarianism and libertarianism, two results of liberalism, okay, but basically taken to two different places. He is very much against libertarianism and very much for communitarianism. So I think he would be critical of a libertarian outlook, okay, but again, I'm not 100% sure I know what you're asking. If you're interested, I'm very happy to send you the essays. I think there's two different essays where he writes that. Just also thinking that in future tense, I think we will be touching on some of these things as well. So I'm gonna put the question to the side, but write it down, make a note to yourself, and we'll come back to it. Okay. I'm gonna share with you this. You should be able to hear now. No.
No.
Why is it not working? Ah, here we go.
They sound similar. People often confuse optimism and hope. But in fact, they're very different. Optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that if we work hard enough together, we can make things better. It needs no courage, just a certain naivety to be an optimist. It needs a great deal of courage to have hope. No Jew knowing.
Oh. Okay. I don't wanna, I kind of like, so we've still got quite a bit to cover and we've only got a short time. Let me just hold
Do
on.
about history and our own past, so often written in tears, can be an optimist. But no Jew who is a true Jew can ever give up hope. And that is why Judaism is, for me, the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. And hope is what transforms the human situation.
Okay, so that was a beautiful summary of what we've been looking at, which is this idea that sits at the heart of Rabbi Sachs's thinking of hope, of tikva, as an active posture, as a posture that transforms the human situation. It isn't just this passive stance, okay? It's the way in which we respond to something outside of ourselves and allow it to guide us in covenant with God and with society and with others to transform the existing status quo. And that's essentially why we can be hopeful, because we believe that we have been given this mandate by God to be partners with God in transforming reality. Okay, so that's where we're going to leave for now, the introduction to Rabbi Sachs's thinking. And again, obviously, all of the concepts that we've been kind of touching on, we're going to unpack as we go through the book. One thing I want to do with you now is very, very briefly, and again, I'm going to send you, God's willing. Again, those of you that are signing up, please be sure to sign up in the next day or two, so that basically I will get the list from Matan, I hope, in the next day or two, and then I will be able to get all your phone numbers and add you to the group. If you have my phone number, and I'm going to quickly, very, very, very quickly put it on the chat. If you have my phone number, you can message me and tell me I've signed up, and I will add you to the group. And then by the beginning of next week, on Sunday, I'll send everything Leonida to the group. Okay, so I want to just very, very briefly go through his biographical timeline, just so that we get an understanding of who he was. It's also really important. I can see that a lot of people on this Zoom are either based in Israel or in America. There's not, as far as I can see, many people in Britain. So it's important for us to kind of understand where he's coming from. He's born in 1948. Okay, he was always very excited that he was born the same year as the state of Israel. His parents were very simple people who had come to London from Europe. His father sold fabric in an East End shop, which is what my father did as well. So I always identify with that. And his older brother, he had three brothers. They were four brothers altogether, Brian, Alan, and Elliot. He attends St Mary's Primary School again. My dad also went to that primary school. A lot of Jews in England, especially during that period, didn't necessarily go to Jewish schools. Okay, so he didn't go to Jewish schools, and then he goes to Christ College School, again, also a non-Jewish school. In 1966, he goes to the University of Cambridge and he studies philosophy based on moral science. Very, very interesting. Again, if one looks at his doctorate, it's really the breeding grounds for so much of his thinking that comes afterwards, but we'll come back to that later on. In 1967, he faces a pivotal moment, which we're going to talk about in a second, with the Six-Day War. Something in his consciousness shifts, and even though until that moment he wanted to be an academic, something shifts, and in 1968, he goes on a trip to America. It's very, very important to him following the Six-Day War, which again we'll talk about in a second. He begins to kind of search for big questions, who he is, and he wants to go and meet all the big voices of the time in Judaism. He has two pivotal meetings, one with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one with Rav Soloveitchik, both of which he sums up as the Rebbe challenged me to lead and Rabbi Soloveitchik challenged me to think. Okay, and they were both extremely influential in his thought. In 1969, not just in his thought, but also in his life trajectory, by the way. 1969, he's given first-class honors with a philosophy degree, moral science, and then he begins research for his doctorate under Philippa Foot, who's a very, very well-known philosopher in England. He marries in 1970, he marries Elaine, and we'll talk about the role of Elaine and her role both in his communitarian philosophy, which I think is super important, and just generally in his outlook in life. In 1971, he becomes a lecturer in moral philosophy at Middlesex Polytechnic, which again is fascinating because he doesn't even, yet have a doctorate at that stage, but clearly he was already really earmarked as a very, very unique, brilliant person, okay? In 1972, he gets his master's. He becomes a lecturer in Jewish philosophy at Jews College, London School of Jewish Studies, which is today it's really the world's oldest rabbinical seminary, but it also is really like it was a place of academic discourse in London at the time. 1976, he gets rabbinic ordination from Jews College and Yeshiva Etz Chaim in London. And in 1978, he's appointed, and here he becomes the head of the Rabbi of Golders Green Synagogue. Okay. In 1981, he gets his doctorate. And so what we're seeing here is that his trajectory suddenly changes. He no longer is just going into academia. He still believes in academia. He still gets his doctorate. But at the same time, in a parallel track, he's also going down the rabbinic road. And the rabbinic road, by the way, this is very important to note because those of you that have been with me over the last few years, especially when we get to his book, The Dignity of Difference, there was a massive controversy over the book, whether or not Rabbi Sachs was talking about the idea of truth being not just in Judaism, but in other religions as well. And he came face to face with the London Betin. The London, again, I'll talk much more to this point when we get to that book, but essentially one has to understand the way in which the Jewish community functions in England is that you have the chief rabbinate, you have the chief rabbi, who is under the guise of the London Betin, of the Betin Bichlal. Okay, and the Betin is made up of much more right-wing, kind of more Haredi elements. Rabbi Sachs did not, most chief rabbis till Rabbi Sachs came from rabbinic dynasties. Rabbi Sachs did not come from a rabbinic dynasty. On the contrary, his family were very simple people, and but he's so brilliant that he is appointed the chief rabbi. Okay, he becomes then the rabbi of the procedure. He's not yet the chief rabbi. He becomes the head of the modern Jewish thought at Jews College. Then he becomes the rabbi of prestigious Marble Arch Synagogue. He then becomes the principal of Jews College, and then in 1991 he becomes the chief rabbi. And that is the stage in which we begin to see how his academic prowess meets his rabbinic training, and therefore his voice begins to be, because he has this standing as the chief rabbi, begins to be a voice that is not just for Jews, because the chief rabbi usually is just the voice for Jews, but it actually becomes the moral voice in public discourse in London, bichlal, right? And we see slowly how his profile becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until he becomes one of the main religious voices really in the world. Okay. And this is where we're going to leave his biography for now. I want to also show you very briefly. These are, again, this is also really useful for you to have. And again, I'm going to send it to you as a PDF. Okay. I'll also send it to you as a PowerPoint so you can also access or I might send the links to the videos that I sent. This is done by a colleague of mine and a very good friend, Professor Sam Liebens. What he did here is he divided the books into different genres. So you've got all of Rabbi Sax's books here. So you've got the books that are based on the weekly Torah reading. So you have all his covenant conversation books, which we're not going to be touching. That's not the aim of this. The aim of this course is to really dig down deep into his philosophical works, not so much his Torah works. His Torah works are very accessible. You can all pick them up. You can all understand them. His philosophical works require, I think, a little bit more background in philosophy and in general sociology and philosophy, and therefore in my mind are much more important to read. So then we have all his translations, and then we have his philosophical books, and this is essentially and books addressed to the world at large. So these are the two categories from which we are reading. Okay, these are his early ones: tradition, untraditional age, persistence of faith, arguments for the sake of heaven, politics of hope. These are all his very early books. Now what happens is these are all written in more, I would say, more condensed and not condensed, more dense language, dense academic language. They're not as accessible as his later books, and he realizes this. So in 2001, when he publishes Radical Then, Radical Now, we begin to see that he recognizes the need to take these kind of maybe even ivory tower ideas and bring them down to the layperson, bring them down to the public, kind of wider public. And he does that in Radical Then, Radical Now. This is not necessarily in order, we also have the dignity of difference. We have the home we build together, to heal a fractured world, the great partnership, not in God's name, future tense, and morality. Now in our group, we've basically covered most of these that I just read. The ones that we're going to be doing together in our group today are future tense, the dignity of difference, arguments for the sake of heaven, and one people.
Could I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Just for those of us who are new to the group and who are
Sure.
American, Radical Then and Radical Now is the British title
Yes.
for Letters in a Scroll.
Thank you very much. That's a really, really important point. Thank you for saying that. There's a reason why, and that is because there's only one book that has two names, okay? And that is Radical Then, Radical Now, because when they were going to publish it in America, the publishers basically didn't think that the term radical in Britain has different connotations to the term radical in America, and they didn't think it would sit well. And so they changed it to a letter in the scroll. Those of you that did the book with me understand the difference between the two. We're not going to go into it now. There's one or two more things I want to share with you. Again, we're not going to have time to go into everything. And I really want us we'll come back next time and just finish the last two slides in this, which really talk about the impact he had from a philosophical perspective. And I want to jump already into the book and the backgrounds of the book that we're going to be doing. But there are a few biographical anecdotes that I want to share with you before we leave. One of them is, and I think this is really, really important. One of them is this one. He talks about his father in the book Radical Then, Radical Now, and he actually dedicates the book to his father and his grandchild, which I think is really poignant. And he says like this, he says, my father was a simple man who lived by simple truths. He had a hard life. He came to the West as a child fleeing from persecution, and he had to leave school at the age of 14 to support his family. When I was young, I used to ask him many questions about Judaism, and his answer was always the same. Jonathan, he used to say, I didn't have an education, and so I don't know the answers to your questions, but one day you will have the education I missed, and you will teach me the answers. Could anyone have been given a greater gift than that? He was a proud Jew, and he wanted his children to go further than he could along the path of faith. And I always argue the book Radical Then, Radical Now, which, by the way, if you haven't read, we're not going to read in our class because we did it already last year, but those of you that haven't read it, after all the reading that I'm going to be setting you for this class, I really, really recommend you reading it. It really is Rabbi Sax's manifesto of Judaism. And I actually believe it's also book that Rabbi Sachs dedicates to his father, because in many ways, this is the book that he wished he had when he was a youth. One of the projects I did was very early on in the war. I worked with Legacy Trust, and I raised money to print 200,000 booklets of one of the chapters, A Letter in the Scroll, the chapter From Radical Then, Radical Now, which essentially talks where Rabbi Sachs says, "Why I'm a proud Jew," and we disseminated them to all the army bases, and I can't even tell you the amount of unbelievable messages we got. Like, it was incredible. And the reason why I did it was because, exactly as I said at the beginning, I felt that this was a moment in which people especially the youth, was searching for this question. I'm fighting for my people. I know I'm doing the right thing. I feel that I am taking responsibility for the Jewish people, but I want to understand what the ruach is. What is that essence? What is that spirit? And that's what Rabbi Sachs answers in that book. And in a way, he is always searching for the answers to the questions that he had as a child. Another beautiful story that he tells about his father is that this idea that they were on holiday in a coastal village, and in those days you didn't wear your kippah, your yarmulke in public, right? You just didn't. It just wasn't the done thing. And they left the house, and he didn't take off his kippah because his father said he didn't need to. And someone rushed up to him and said, "You've forgotten to take off your yarmulke." And my father turned round and he said to him, he said, by walking, one second, he meant it kindly, meaning the man that said it to them. He was simply trying to save me from embarrassment, much as if my shirt tail had been hanging out. But for once, my father got angry and replied, "No child of mine will ever be ashamed to be to be Jewish in public." And we continued on our way. It was not a very tactful response, but it taught me, as perhaps no more formal lesson could ever, to never be ashamed of who I was. And I think that this notion of Jewish pride animates so many of Rabbi Sachs's book. What Rabbi Sachs wants us to understand, and this goes back to the idea of victimhood and agency. Rabbi Sachs does not want us to be the victims of our Jewish heritage. He wants us to be the agents of the Jewish vision. And that idea of what does it mean to be an agent of change in the world, to be an agent for Judaism in the world, that was his life mission. His life mission was to show us why we should be proud to be a Jew, why we should, take it forward. And the place that this happens, the moment this happens, and I'm going to have to rush off because I have to collect my daughter in 1 minute, but I really want to just read this with you, and then we'll come back next time, literally for the first 10 minutes, just to finish this off. He speaks about the 6-Day War, and he says like this. He says, "I was a student in Cambridge, and all of a sudden, there were people that were coming out the woodworks, praying for the state of Israel, people I didn't even know were Jewish." And he said, "I'd witnessed something in those days and weeks that didn't make sense in the rest of my world. It had nothing to do with politics or war or even prayer. It had to do with Jewish identity. Collectively, the Jewish people looked in the mirror and said, we are still Jews." And when you read the whole thing, which is in Radical Then, Radical Now, in A Letter in the Scroll, there's no way of there's no way not to see what happened to us on October the 7th and 8th. Okay, it literally mirrors the experience that we had. Okay, how can anyone truly be born into specific obligations and responsibilities without their consent? Okay, so this goes back to the fact that he was a student of Enlightenment philosophy that said everything I do has to be consensual and everything I do has to be a choice. Okay, and Rabbi Sachs said he didn't choose to be part of the Jewish people. It just kind of fell upon him, right? So he says, logically it didn't add up, but psychologically it did. Without any conscious decision, I was reminded that merely by being born into the Jewish people, I was enmeshed in a network of relationships that connected me to other people, other places, other times. I belonged to a people, and being part of a people, I belonged. It didn't make sense in terms of 20th century thought, yet it made eminent sense in the language of Jewish tradition. Okay, I'm going to stop there, but I want to say that I think one of the most profound contributions that Rabbi Sachs brings to the Jewish world is his ability to bring together the ideas that are so central to our existence, right? The ideas of freedom, autonomy, individual rights, the ideas of democracy, all of these ideas that are so fundamental to us as human beings in the world, and to show how they intersect, but in a very specific way, with the Jewish tradition, with biblical tradition. And this is where Rabbi Sacks' gift was. And by doing that, not just to intersect, but to show the foundations of the Western liberal tradition come from the Bible. And for us to be proud Jews and to say, look what we bring to the world. Rabbi Sacks was that kind of dialogical meeting point between universalism and particularism. And that's what we're going to step into when we look at future tense. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to sign off. Didn't even leave time to like questions, but next time, God willing, we're going to come back together. Please read for next time. Don't have the book with me, but I'm almost certain that there's a prologue. Is there a prologue to future tense? There is, right? So please read the prologue and the introduction. Okay, at least that. Again, if you get further and you can read more, just read and read and read. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to read the whole book at some point anyway. But certainly for next week, the prologue and the introduction, and we're going to jump into that next time. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see you all. And next time also we will make real introductions. Okay,
Thank you.
we will take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.